Robert Valencia is a contributing writer at Global Voices and an analyst who focuses on Latin America. Robert, also always good to have you with us.
Good to be back.
Well, let's start by putting this into context. In 2002, the government had been already fighting a guerrilla war for 40 years, and it was a hard guerrilla war. The guerrillas were in control of about 100 municipalities. It's about a tenth of all the municipalities in Colombia. In comes new President Alvaro Uribe, and he immediately launches a very strong operation against the rebels. Was there popular support at that point for what he was doing?
Well, of course. I mean, I think anything that goes against a guerrilla, it's always supported by the government and the population alike. And what we were seeing with Operación Orión, which was the name in Spanish, is that the guerrillas managed to meddle into this big Comuna 13, or the shanty towns of Medellin, what we have found out is, what we just heard, is people who had nothing to do with the guerrillas or the paramilitaries.
Got caught in the middle of it.
Correct. These were just passersby who were taken as what we call false positives.
Now, who was mostly responsible at that point? Because the security forces went in first, but then they pulled out. Was it mostly the right-wing paramilitary groups?
It seems that the government, the police, and the paramilitaries have colluded so that they could attack guerrillas that were meddling into the business of drug trafficking in Medellin. So that's where, I mean, of course, this is a step that is missing, and that the Attorney General is going to find out whether the government has some implication in this raid.
Any U.S. connection to any of this? I know the U.S. had been involved in training security forces.
Well, there's no account that the U.S. government has any involvement. My assumption is, of course, you have Plan Colombia, you had this U.S. aid, this military aid to the country, but there's really not a direct involvement, not to my knowledge.
Well, we're talking about a possible 300 bodies in this one grave. Thousands have been exhumed from other graves.
Of course. Here's the thing. We found out that there's probably 90 bodies after the Operation Orion raid, but there's probably 300 more, because this was a landfill that was used before by the Medellin cartel in the 1990s, 1980s. And as we just heard from the report, we're talking about 187 acres of landfill. There was a complete lack of action by the government. They did not stop the dumping of everything that you can think of, cement, aluminum, every kind of waste that goes into this landfill. So it's going to be a daunting task to remove all this landfill. We don't know if the bodies are there, and I think the families have the right to know what happened to their family, to their loved ones.
Medellin has been a long-suffering city from drugs and the guerrilla warfare. Now, Uribe did end up getting control of the paramilitaries a few years later.
Correct.
And he still remains a senator. He was reelected, in a landslide, after he launched this campaign against the guerrillas. Has his popularity waned at all, or is he still as popular as he ever was?
Absolutely not. I think he still remains a very popular figure in Colombia, and I think, based on what we just heard, this is also going to redefine the definition of victims. Let's not forget that we have a peace process. Both the guerrillas and the government are discussing. Correct. And they're defining what the definition of victims is. This is the case where the guerrillas might have the upper hand and say, we are also victims of this war.
So how do you think this will affect the peace process? Because the reality is, this half-a-century war, there are more people internally displaced in Colombia than anywhere else in the world outside Syria.
And Darfur.
It's worse than Darfur.
It's probably worse. Yeah, it's definitely worse. I think, again, the guerrillas say we are the first victims of the civil war that has, created bloodbath and mayhem in Colombia for 50 years. And what this is going to happen is the government and the guerrillas are going to have to come to agreements and say, well, you also have responsibilities in the number of victims that Colombia has accumulated for so many years. Both the government and the guerrillas had some involvement in this. And if I just want to add one more point, is that if the families finally discovered that the government had direct implication in this operation, they might take matters into their own hands and take them to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Washington, D.C.
All right. Robert Valencia, good to have you with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much.